Okay, I think we might kick off. I know that we've got over 200 registrations for this session today, but we do need to kick off. We have got limited time and we do want to be able to make sure that we can get through all the material for you today. So can I warmly welcome everybody here today to our October LGV Connects webinar on effective complaints handling. This is going to be a great turnout today, and thank you to all of you that have been very prompt in joining us this afternoon. So first of all, can I just acknowledge the traditional Aboriginal owners of country throughout Victoria, their ongoing connection to this land, and we pay our respects to their culture, elders past, present and future. Thank you. So, wow, we've got a bumper agenda today and hopefully lots of information that you can glean in relation to complaints handling today. My name is Julie Reid. I'm the Executive Director of Local Government Victoria, and I joined Local Government Victoria 8 months ago after 32 years in local government. So I'm very, very excited to see the implementation of the Local Government Act really come to fruition. And I'm certainly well aware of the excellent work that's been done out there by Victorian councils, particularly in these challenging times that we're finding ourselves in at the moment. So well done to all of you. We're on the home straight now, so that's a good thing. So LGV Connects is a series of monthly online webinars used to promote updates to the sector regarding implementation. And each month we focus on a particular topic and often correspond to addressing any difficulties or obstacles the sector may be experiencing. So today's topic is specifically devoted to providing information to councils to support the development of their complaints policy by the 31st of December 21. Can I just remind everybody, if you could just put your microphones on mute as you enter into the meeting, that'd be great. Thank you. Now, we have a very special guest speaker here today, Deborah Glass, the Victorian Ombudsman. Welcome. And she's going to join us for a very important part of this session. So I will introduce you to the Ombudsman in a short while. In a moment, what I'm going to do, though, first of all, is take you through the update of the implementation of the Local Government Act, and then we'll go through the legislative requirements of the complaints policy. And of course, we, with an eminent speaker like our Victorian Ombudsman, we do thank her for being here today and helping us with this complex topic that I know that a lot of you deal with on a day-to-day basis. And there will be some time for questions and answers at the end, as long as we're on time moving through things. So we'll try and provide enough time for that as well. We'll see how we go. Okay, I'd now like to take you through some of the project milestones of the implementation of the Act. And the Act 2020 delivers the most significant reforms, as you know, for local government in Victoria over the 30 years, the last 30 years. And it provides a contemporary and accessible legislative framework to meet the current and future needs of the local government sector, as you know, and also to support the Victorian community. And the implementation is overseen by a project control board comprising of key stakeholders, including peak body representatives and local government CEOs. And this structure exists to make sure that the sector is the leader in the implementation of the Act. So you can see the plethora, shall we say, of work that the local government sector has had to do over a period of time. It is no mean feat, and we really do think that this is a remarkable amount of work that is being dealt with very professionally by the sector in a very short period of time. So you can see that, in particular, if I can draw your attention to stage 3B, we're currently in that stage at the moment, which includes the establishment of the integrated strategic planning and reporting framework by the 31st of October this year, aside from annual reports, which most of you will probably know by now that we've extended that time of delivery of the annual reports by the Minister. The Minister's granted an extension, and councils now have to the 30th of November to deliver those annual reports to the Minister and must adopt the annual report within 28 days of submission. So if I could turn to the workforce plans, they're also a key component of stage 3B, and these are due to be developed by the 31st of December 21. And LGV has facilitated a working group that supported the development of a foundational guide for workforce planning. And this document is available on the Engage Vic website and provides a focus and achievable approach to those councils that might be developing a workforce plan for the first time. And support is also being provided for the asset plan, which is underway through the establishment of a working group. And this working group has so far met twice, and there are 2 webinars on the topic and support material posted on the Engage Vic website. A reminder that asset plans are due actually not by the end of this year, but by 30th of June next year. Then stage 4, LGV has completed key projects and support material in the implementation of stage 4. So the complaints policy obviously sits fairly and squarely in that stage 4. And LGV has worked with the Victorian Ombudsman to develop the guide on complaints handling, which will support councils in the development of the complaints policy. And we've promoted this guide widely so far, and it's available on our resources webpage. And so more about that later. There's also a few other things. The land regulations, we've developed fact sheets that provide support to councils in relation to changes in the Act impacting on land regulations. And these include the impact of carrying out works on land, requirements of providing land information or certificates, council's powers in relation to land, unpaid money rights, obligations and changes in local laws. And these have been promoted in the Implementation Matters newsletters. I hope you're finding those useful, and also some shared fact sheets that are again available on the LGV website. Then the staff code of conduct and recruitment policy is another one. There's a recruitment policy working group that will advise LGV on the best support required for councils in this area, and this working group consists of sector representatives from both metro and rural councils. So for those of you that are on that, thank you for your contribution. And the CEO employment and remuneration policy is another key one, and LGV has collated examples of recently developed CEO employment remuneration policies and shared those widely. So reach into us if you want to access those. And we've also given you suggestions on legislation that could be relevant to councils when developing these documents as well. And then, of course, the procurement policy, very important policy. The Guide to Social Procurement has been updated and will be promoted in tomorrow's Implementation Matters newsletter and on Engage Vic website. So lots of guidance there for you to reach into. So hopefully you find that useful. Thank you. So I'd now like to take you through the complaints policy and how it relates to the Local Government Act. Just move into the next slide. Thank you. So now let's look at what the Act itself requires. So compared to other parts of the Act, the components of the complaints policy are described in a fair amount of detail. This slide doesn't capture all of the relevant sections of the Act, but I would like to draw your attention to section 107 of the Act, which outlines the requirements of a complaints policy. And you're probably all across this because you're all experts in complaint policy development by now. But section 107 is one that I draw your attention to. So the council must develop and maintain a complaints policy that includes processes for dealing with or refusing to deal with complaints, reviewing any action, decision or service in respect of the complaint, and also the internal review process for a complaint. So just moving on. So the integration between complaints handling and continuous improvement through the service planning principles is an important part of the legislation. And indeed, the complaints policy has the capacity to be one of the most significant ongoing cyclical processes that really drives continuous improvement for councils. And of course, the legislation does not say exactly how the council should do this. It's up to each individual council to make the decision according to their own needs and capacity. So there is that flexibility there for you to be able to shape that in the way that you feel is your organisation can cater for. The key messages for you really, however, is that the policy doesn't need to be perfect in its first iteration, and you can continue to build on it and improve on it continuously. I know you're all under the pump. You've got a lot to do before the end of the year. We need to have a good starting point, but it doesn't have to be perfect straight away. And you'll learn as you go what works and what doesn't work for your organisation. So, possible challenges for the sector. I think we are wanting to just acknowledge that we understand that there are challenges for local government in this space. And with the complaints policy being due by the 31st of December, we know that there are competing deadlines. The LGVs, we're well aware of the COVID-19 challenge, but there are some councils that have also been impacted by natural disasters like floods and storms. And we've been working with the minister to try and see if we can release some of that burden from you, and that's why we asked the minister to extend the time on the annual reports. Unfortunately, there's no flexibility under the Act for us to be able to extend any of the other deadlines under the new Act. The minister doesn't have the power to extend those, and I've written to your CEOs recently to advise of that situation. So, resourcing the implementation of the complaints policy can be, we recognise a challenge in itself. For many councils, tracking and processing complaints effectively will require, possibly some overhauls of your systems or your architecture. So we appreciate that. But linked to this point is that many councils, particularly smaller rural councils, may struggle initially to bring in those IT or staff capacity to make the full use of the data that becomes available. However, we're not new in local government to complaints. Working in the sector for 32 years, and we are in a situation where we understand. Certainly a lot of us are sophisticated in the way that we deal with complaints. It really should be noted that the implementation of the Act is that iterative process, and we need to not necessarily attain the gold standard at the first stage, but like I said, have this gradual journey to improvement, and you need to work within the resources that you've got. Understand and appreciate that. Okay, so now we move to the highlight of the day, and it is my pleasure to introduce our very special guest speaker. I'm going to move on so we can make sure that we get that bit of it out of the way, and then we'll go back to questions and answers at the end for both myself and our Ombudsman. So, Deborah Glass was appointed as the Victorian Ombudsman in March 2014 for a period of 10 years. And she is the first woman to serve as the Victorian Ombudsman. Before becoming the Ombudsman, Deborah led criminal and misconduct investigations into police for the Independent Police Complaints Commission of England and Wales. And in 2008, Deborah became the IPCC Deputy Chair, and in 2012, she was awarded an Order of the British Empire for her service. Deborah was raised in Melbourne and studied law at Monash University, and her career has taken her to an investment bank in Switzerland through to financial services regulation in Hong Kong and London. And Deborah is on the board of the International Ombudsman's Institute, which connects more than 190 ombudsman offices across the world. Deborah is committed to ensuring fair and reasonable decision-making and improving public administration, and she holds a firm belief in public sector integrity and advancing human rights. And in July 2021, the Victorian Ombudsman's Office, in conjunction with Local Government Victoria, published the Councils and Complaints, a Good Practice Guide, second edition. And this document is available, as you probably are aware, on the Engage Vic website and the LGV website as governance resource in the governance resources section. So, welcome to you, Ombudsman. Over to you for your presentation. Thank you. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Julie. And in typical sort of COVID online fashion, I have to ask, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Good. I'm joined today by a colleague of mine who is going to assist me with the slides. But let me just start, of course, with acknowledgement myself of country. I'm joining you today from beautiful Bunurong country. And I'd like to acknowledge that wherever we're joining this webinar today, we are all on the traditional lands of our First Peoples, and that land has never been ceded. The sovereignty of that land has never been ceded. This particular beautiful painting comes from the Torch charity, and it hangs in my conference room in Burke Street, and I'm beginning to wonder if we're going to see it again. So I feel rather sentimental when I look at it. But there we are. Now, usually at this point, when I'm talking to a large group of people, as I believe I am, I would look around the room and I would say, what do you know about the Ombudsman's office? But of course, I can't see the vast majority of you. For all I know, you're sitting there still in your pajamas, and I can't really ask you these questions. So I'm going to have to make some sort of executive decisions that you have a basic knowledge of what the Ombudsman's office does. And I should also mention that if any of you were at the presentation I gave to the seminar organised by Melbourne City Council not so long ago, this is the same material. I am talking about good complaints handling. So just to let you know that if it's a bit repetitive, well, that's the topic, and and it's obviously a really important one. So what I am going to talk about today, and I'm going to get to the sort of straight to the heart of today's conversation, is this is about preparing for good complaints handling under the Local Government Act. I'm going to be talking about the provisions in the Act, and of course, specifically about that newly revised guide. And my thanks up front to Local Government Victoria and to any of you who assisted in the development of that good practice guide, which I really hope is of use to the sector. That's the purpose of doing it. But what I do want to start with, and that's what this graph illustrates, is let's just look at overview about why it is important. Why do we need to even think about complaints handling in the local government sector? Well, here we are. I have a very broad jurisdiction, as I'm sure you know. I deal with complaints about over 1,000 public bodies and entities. And guess what? Local councils have always been right up there in terms of numbers. It's been, for as long as I've been in the role, and that's getting on for 8 years now, complaints about local councils have accounted for the second highest number of complaints overall. The first has generally been prisons, and there's an obvious explanation for why prisons comes first, because there is a free call number into the Ombudsman's office in all Victorian prisons. And I've often observed when I look at these stats, if every household had a free call line with a number attached that you can ring the Ombudsman if you have a complaint about your local council, I suspect those numbers would be very much higher. And I don't think that's a bad thing, I have to say. I think this is fundamentally about accessibility. And we all know that local councils are that tier of government that is closest to the population. I mean, everybody in Victoria pretty much has a relationship with their local council. So it's inevitably going to result in grievances, whether they're justified or not. So that's why fundamentally complaints handling within the local government sector, getting that right, it must be so important for you and for me and for the public. So you can see why local councils have played such a big part in my workload over this time. And what I want to reflect on is that when I first started in the role, this is back in 2014, I was asking some questions about what's important, what are the issues, what are the complaints telling us? And I was being told then that one of the biggest areas of complaint about local councils was how the councils actually dealt with complaints. So it wasn't necessarily rates, rubbish, and so on. It was actually complaints handling. So now this might be a bit tongue-in-cheek, but the attitudes to complaints seem to be illustrated by this. And that essentially complaints were something that was best to be avoided. Complaints were a bad thing. We don't like them. We'll park them, and we won't really care about them very much. So it's an absolute fact of life that some types of complaint are going to be unavoidable if you are a local council. People are always going to complain about rates. They're always going to complain about missed bins. They're always going to complain about parking fines. Let's face it. But one of the things that they shouldn't always be complaining about is how well you deal with their complaints. So the focus here is on the councils themselves doing a better job of dealing with their public. Now, I am, and this is something that has been a focus of mine since I came into the role. So some examples of those reports. The first one was in 2015, when I put out an original piece of work on local councils. I went back to that, and we put out our first good practice guide that year as well. I came back to that in October 2019, and then we put out our further good practice guide, as you know, in July. And of course, there are other topics as well, including financial hardship, and many others that have affected the sector. So this is something, how council deal with their complaints has been dear to my heart since I came into the role. And this fundamentally is about hoping that through all the things we do, we can drive down those complaints with how councils deal with complaints themselves. So we did note, so, as I said, we started this in 2015, we put out our first guide then, and we did note some improvements when we went back to this in 2019. So certainly there were many things that were being done better. But what was more accessible, for one thing, more councils had policies when we went back in 2019. What we also found was that more needed to be done. And one of the key issues, and I imagine you will recall this when we put out that report in 2019, was the lack of consistency about what a complaint was. What is the descriptor? And the point I made then was that it not only disguises the true level of dissatisfaction with council services, it also means it's absolutely impossible to make meaningful comparisons. One example, which I put in my report, is, and I think this is one of the starkest, was this comparison between one of our smallest rural councils, Ararat, and one of our largest, indeed the largest metropolitan council, Melbourne City Council. And the reported numbers, and this is in our report, of complaints and requests for service. So you can see there, and these numbers were ventilated widely when I put this out in 2019. 88 complaints in Melbourne City Council, over 1,000 in Ararat. And again, look at the comparators there for requests for service. So without making any value judgments about either council, what is obvious from that is that you cannot meaningfully make a comparison between them. What was very clear in the issues around definitions was that the two biggest bugbears for councils were these, how you treat requests for service and how you treat matters with statutory rights of appeal. So what I'm going to do is address both. So this next slide sort of breaks one of my golden rules, which is never have words on a slide. But I do want to put up the definition because actually it is really important. And this is the definition of a complaint in the new Local Government Act, the revised Local Government Act. And the first time it does contain that definition, and it is a broad definition. And that really is the point that I want to make here. It is basically an expression of dissatisfaction. It does not have to be in writing. People don't have to use the word complaint. So this is about, bear in mind that this is telling you that a grievance, if it's a grievance, if it's dissatisfaction, this is a complaint. So to illustrate this, let me start with what falls within the definition of a complaint. And I'd like to illustrate it with what I believe to be everybody's favourite subject on these matters, missed bins. Missed bins was certainly a feature of our first report and definitely our second one. So is "you missed my bin" a complaint? Well, answer is yes. And here we are. This is highlighting for me my point about complaints being free feedback. What you've got here, and this is, I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek, but here is a part of, I think what we called it, Stormville Shire Council, where a number of bins have been missed in a particular part of the street. If somebody is complaining about a missed bin, they're not asking you to investigate that. What they want is for you to pick up the bin. But that is free feedback that they will be telling you that your bins contractor is missing a whole segment of the street. So recording that as a complaint should not generate extra work from you. What they want is the bin list, but it sits with their opportunities for improvement. So let me move on to everybody's second favourite subject, which is infringements. So, should you record something with a statutory right of appeal? Parking fines. And the answer to that is also yes, but that doesn't mean you have to deal with it. Again, you might want to, and what I want to give you here is an illustration of the kind of complaint you may well wish to take on. So we get lots of complaints about parking tickets, as probably not quite as many as you do, but certainly many. Now, we don't deal with all of them because there is a statutory right of review. And if I dealt with every complaint I got about parking tickets, I did a lot more than 100 or so staff I have at present. But we do exercise discretion, and we do that when somebody is particularly vulnerable. So this is a complaint I want to tell you about that came from a homeless person with a learning disability. He'd driven to a conference at a local church, and he'd parked in a disabled parking bay with a valid permit. He had a disability parking permit, he displayed his permit, and at some point he needed to move his car. He goes off, comes back, the space is blocked, so he parks in a regular permit zone because it's the only space available, and he gets an infringement. He applies to the council for an internal review, and it's denied on the grounds that a disabled parking permit does not offer an exemption from parking in a permit zone, which is technically correct. But was it fair? And again, should we deal with the complaint, or should we just tell him that he's got a statutory right of review? Well, in this case, we used our discretion, we made inquiries, because we figured it was unreasonable to expect somebody with a learning disability to take legal proceedings in those circumstances. And besides, what were they thinking? And we developed this kind of rather tongue-in-cheek decision meter to illustrate the use of discretion, which you might also find useful, because actually, if you were the head of this unit responsible for complaints, or the CEO of a local council, wouldn't you want to know if your staff are making decisions like that? So I hope these examples, and there are others in the guide, will help you comply with the Act, with its broad definition of complaint. And there's a lot of other guidance in other areas as well. And just very briefly, it's got a lot of practical advice and tools that can be applied flexibly to councils of all sizes. We're incredibly conscious of the fact that there are small rural councils as well as large metropolitan councils and everything in between. And it is intended to not be a one-size-fits-all. So, there's a model policy in there, there's a self-assessment tool, and it does also include examples of good practice. So here, for example, is one from Maroondah City Council, which reminds councils, which you can see here, is in easy English. Again, really good practice for how to communicate with the public about your services. There's also reminders about the Human Rights Charter, and I'll say a little bit about that in a moment. What the guide also does is highlight the importance of having a complaints policy. Now, I hope that you've all got policies in place. You now have to have one. The wording in the Act doesn't tell you exactly what that policy should be or how it should be adopted, but we've given you some guidance there. So again, there's a model policy. You don't have to follow it, but it's there to help you if you see fit, and to adapt it in accordance with your own needs and desires. So we move on to another area within the guide that is dear to my heart, and that is internal reviews, because they're They're not new in to the guide, but the requirement to have them is new in the Local Government Act. So I would encourage you to get that process right. And I really can't stress enough to you how important that process is. But even though internal reviews might just seem as this bureaucratic additional layer you need to impose in your complaints handling, but what they really are, when they're carried out properly, is they're a fail-safe against poor decision making. At the front line, you're never going to be able to stop. And this, it's equally true in my own office. You'll have new staff, you'll have new people starting, you'll have people who will get things wrong and who will make poor decisions up front. And what internal reviews give you is that quality assurance process. And they'll identify cracks in the system that wouldn't you rather know about than have the Ombudsman point out. So a good internal review process will stop complaints escalating to my office. A plea from me, please do not call your internal review process an internal ombudsman. There is only one ombudsman in this area, and that's me. But ultimately, what your internal review process should provide is that what were they thinking check, that decision meter that I highlighted earlier, so that you avoid situations like the one I'm about to illustrate, which is Dean's story. So let me just play you this. It's just a minute or two of recording.
I was quite shocked, community.
I think that's not coming through very well, I'm afraid. That's
Yes, we seem to have lost the sound.
Yeah. I think, look, I'll move on. I mean, this is this comes out of my financial hardship report, and it really is it's a true story. This is somebody who was, I think, traumatized is not too strong a word to describe it, by the way his council dealt with his application for financial hardship. So, what I wanted to illustrate here is that what you hope is that an internal review provides that fail-safe thinking, that quality assurance, where somebody fresh looks at it with a non-bureaucratic mindset and says, I think we need to exercise some discretion here. And that's, that was the illustration, I think, of that point. But I'll move on from there and to another topic that we often get asked about, which is how to deal with complaints about councillors and the CEO. Again, this is something that is frequently of interest to the sector. We get a lot of complaints about it, and we get a lot of requests for how to deal with these things. And what our guide points out is that the definition of complaint in the Act doesn't include complaints about councillors. That's dealt with by another part of the Act. You do need to have processes in place to deal with, to manage complaints about councillors, and that should include how to complain to IBAC or the LGI, but not to my office. We don't deal with councillor conduct, except in very limited circumstances as referred by IBAC. You do need to have a process in place for dealing with complaints about the CEO. That does fall within the definition of complaint, and I absolutely recognise that it is not uncommon for such complaints to be vexatious. So having a process doesn't mean that you need to do necessarily anything significant with it. It just means about providing a reasonable response and to be able to justify a decision if challenged. The last main area that I want to touch on in our guide is something that I know is dear to the hearts of all complaints handlers I'm aware of, and we've added some more guidance into the guide about this. And this is on dealing with challenging or unreasonable behaviour, something every complaints handler, in my experience, deals with at some time or other, and something that we, in the Ombudsman's office, have deep personal experience of. So what the guide should help you understand is that challenging behaviour isn't always unreasonable. The fact is that lots of people are frustrated, quite understandably so, by an experience with the council, and sometimes they cannot control their emotions or their behaviour, And we've also noticed, and I'm sure you have too, how much COVID has heightened emotions in the community. And of course, complaints handlers, your complaints handlers, my complaints handlers are human as well. So the issue is even more topical. So wouldn't it be wonderful if all complaints handlers behaved like this? Wouldn't it be nice? But they don't, do they? And more often, it's like this. So we're all, we all get that, we're all used to that, and we all need in our various ways to deal with that. Now, frontline staff who are trained in good complaint handling techniques like active listening can actually resolve the issue and prevent the complaint and the behaviour from escalating. So, one of the things our guide is attempting to do is to provide you with some of those techniques to, rather than just go, I can't deal with this, and park the complaint, which then just escalates the behaviour, is how do we contain it and manage it? So, there are a lot of situations in which these ones might be very familiar to you. There's a raft of them that all complaints handlers, I think at some point, if not daily, find themselves having to deal with. Why hasn't it happened immediately? Why isn't the response? Why wasn't this fixed yesterday? So we've got different forms of challenging behaviour which we need to deal with. But there's also an extreme part of that, which is unreasonable behaviour. And those are the kinds of behaviours that raise real health and safety issues or resource and equity issues for you and your staff. Now, you know the type of behaviour I mean. These are where people become obsessively persistent, who won't let go of the issue, and some people are actually downright dangerous. Now, some of you, have asked, I believe, me to talk a bit about human rights and how to deal with, with human rights and dealing with complaints. And we illustrated one of those a few months ago when I put out my human rights casebook. So let me describe this situation, which may be familiar to you. This was a case, we called him Jonathan in our casebook. He was a passionate community activist, and he'd turn up to council meetings heckling and disruptive and threatening staff. So what the council did was they decided to ban him from public meetings for 12 months. And he complained to my office that it was a breach of his human rights, which you may be aware are, in fact, include the right to participate in public life. But human rights, as I pointed out, and I pointed out in my casebook recently, are a balancing act. And in this case, the council got the balance right. So what they were balancing was Jonathan's rights to participate in public life against those to whom he was aggressive. And importantly, when they considered the ban, it was time limited, it was subject to review, and they gave him other options for how to deal with the council about his concerns. So they didn't just say they weren't going to deal with him at all. So we looked at the limitations that council had placed on his rights, and we said, yep, that's reasonable. So again, just reflecting more broadly on human rights, I know that there are people who think that having to deal with human rights can be quite burdensome. But in fact, using a human rights framework actually helps you make better decisions. And in this case, confirmed that the actions the council took were reasonable. So very finally, and I'm going to be brief, and because I do want to leave some time for questions. Julie, in her opening, touched on the importance of complaints data to drive improvements, and this is something that I think we should all be thinking about. One of the great benefits of recording all of your complaints is what are you going to do with that wealth of information that data gives you? Because this is a wealth of information about people's satisfaction with your services that you can use to improve those services. Now, there's some guidance here, but really this comes down to the size of your council, the systems you've got in place, and it's not really for me to be able to advise. You might, if you've got an existing system that's well and good, a small council might just put this all on an Excel spreadsheet. We're about to do things like launch web chat to improve our accessibility. We're looking at SMS for keeping people updated. But the point is here, it's whatever fits with your needs, your size of council, what works for you. And the real point here is that complaints are really valuable. So, and you should mine that. You know, this is about seeing your complaints as a return on investment. You know, that every one of those complaints is this little piece of gold that is going to tell you something about the satisfaction of your public about your services. And that it's not just about fixing complaints at an individual level, but it allows you to look at things at a systemic level and go, right, what do I need to know here? What do I need to do? And last of all, a reminder that what really drives improvement in complaints handling is leadership. This is not new, I am sure, to any of you. But leadership is so important to create a culture in which complaints are valued, where complaints handling isn't a box to be ticked, and in which staff are trained and supported to deal with complaints. So you can have a fabulous set of policies on paper, and it's going to be completely worthless if you haven't got a culture within the organisation that actually values complaints. And if you don't have that culture that values complaints, you'll never see the improvements that good complaints handling should be able to help to drive. So whether that's internal leadership to, you know, with the culture of the organisation, or external leadership, equally vital. And one of the things I know, because people were saying this to us when we were talking about the definitions of complaints, was, you know, well, this is going to mean that suddenly I'm going to have thousands and thousands of complaints, and you know, the media are going to jump on that, and they're going to, you know, to make, you know, to criticise us for it. Well, this is where the message to leaders is to be brave and to say, you know, to explain, this is why, you know, we have fundamentally changed our policies here, because we are valuing complaints. We are recognising them as free feedback. You know, we're encouraging them. We're increasing our accessibility. That's the reason that we have a different set of complaints numbers, that we see complaints that we've changed here. We see them, you know, it's a revelation. They are a vital tool to drive improvements. So how can we help in all of that? Well, very quick recap about the guide. It contains a lot of practical advice and tools, and it's intended to support you not only to meet the requirements of the Local Government Act, but really to provide a better experience for people making complaints, and ultimately for you to improve delivery of your services. So you can see not just a model complaints policy, self-assessment tool, there's some model wording for how you can do these things. But and where it's intended is to be something that you can take. You're not required to adopt it, but it's there for you to use as you see fit. And it's to help you as you like. It's not mandatory. Policy, to have a policy is mandatory. What you put in it, obviously, is not. So where else can we help you? Well, we also have education and training. We've been working really hard over the last year to shift our offerings online so that we're able to assist there. So, you know, some of you, and again, I would normally ask a show of hands at this point, you know, who's done our good complaints handling courses, who's done our dealing with challenging behaviour courses. But clearly, I can't do that. So what we have been doing over the last year is turning those courses into online courses, which we hope will be as effective as the courses we've been able to deliver in person, and still able to offer bespoke courses, you know, as and when, and we hope we can return to some semblance of normal sometime in the future. So there's a couple of dates of what's coming up. There's some training that we can help. We also have a new complaints review function. We know where we are, whether we choose to, or you can invite us, you know, to review your complaints handling functions, and we may well, again, we have limited resources for this, but it's one of our new functions in our Act that came into effect last year. So let me stop at this point. I'm sure you're all bursting with questions, and I do want to make sure we've left at least 10 minutes to do so. So I will hand back to you now, Julie.
Thank you, Ombudsman, and particularly a very. I've got a bit of feedback. Could I just ask everyone to turn off their microphones for me? I think that's a little bit better. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Very informative presentation. So now there's a great opportunity to be able to ask any questions. So please put your questions in the chat if you could, or if you wanted to pop up your hand, certainly I can take some questions from the floor about the Ombudsman's presentation or anything that you've heard today. So surely there must be some questions out there. So I'll just give you a second to mull over that. So there's nothing coming through. Oh, hang on, we've got a hand that's gone up. Carolyn, can I call on Carolyn to speak up? Thank you.
Thank you. It was just to note that the chat had been locked, but I can see it's unlocked now. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, let me just check if there's any other questions. So we've had a question, Ombudsman, from Robin Spiller. For complaints procedure, what is an example of fair and objective?
We give you a model policy there, so I'm not sure I can take it beyond that. It's fairness is one of those complex areas that we could talk about for hours, and I'm not sure that's the purpose of today. What I would invite you to do is to go back to my little sort of rather tongue-in-cheek decision meter, because I use that as a kind of meter for fairness. Is this decision fair? Is it okay? Does it pass the fairness test? Because very often, when we're taken aback by an unfair decision, it's because what were they thinking? Somebody just took a sort of rather mindless bureaucratic approach and didn't look at the person at the centre of that decision. So yes, I don't think this could be a very long answer, and I don't think that's what you're asking for from me. But fairness is a bit like the elephant in the room. You know it when you see it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And we've got a question here from Greg Lamy. What are your thoughts on internal versus external investigations or investigators?
Well, that depends on quality. It really does. It's a good question, and it's something that I will tell you that my office does get concerned about regularly, because we want to be able to, in quite a few circumstances, rely on agencies, including local councils, to investigate a matter. If something comes through as a potential public interest complaint or some other matter that requires investigation, we'd like you to do that properly. We don't want to have to investigate every area of misconduct that comes across our aura. So it comes down to doing a good job. So yes, if you have good, well-qualified staff, fantastic.
Thank you. We've had a question come through from Pete Williams. What advice do you have to align the culture of complaint handling with the policies, procedures and frameworks where senior leadership may not currently have buy-in?
You just can't do it without buy-in. I mean, I can't stress enough that you cannot have a good complaints policy if you don't have leaders in the organisation who support them. I think that's, if that's the situation, I think that's a really serious one. So my advice to you, do the best you can, at the level you are, but that's a concern. That really is a concern, and ultimately it's a concern for your council, and it may become a concern for the Ombudsman.
Thank you. Carolyn Alton has asked, the Act provides complaint can include dissatisfaction with a decision of council. It is intended to include decisions of the council in the chamber. And are there examples of processes for complaints about decisions of the council versus decisions of the council officers?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, this is an area, and it's cropped up before, that might be ripe for some further guidance, I think, Julie. And what I'm keen to see is, bear in mind, we're on to our second iteration of the Good Complaints Guide. If the sector is finding there are other areas that need further elaboration. What I would really encourage you is to note those. They may not happen in my term, because in my 10-year term, I think 2 iterations of a complaints handling guide is probably enough. But what I am sure about is this is always going to be an issue. And the more we focus on good complaints handling, the more issues will come up that they will need some, further guidance or clarification to the sector. And I would encourage you to raise those. So if LGV would like to just keep a list of areas that would help, and approach us about those. I mean, I wouldn't be waiting, for the next couple of years for that. If there are a number of them, as people look at the guide and apply it, where clarification is required. Again, I think that's also over to you, Julie, and LGV to issue guidance if necessary.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we're hearing that loud and clear. Thank you. Kirsten Nichols is asking, what would a good process for dealing with complaints received by a CEO to obtain fair and unbiased handling with limited resourcing? A good process with limited resourcing.
I would refer you again to the materials we put out in our good practice guide. We absolutely recognise that people have limited resources to deal with complaints, and it is about being proportionate, isn't it? So that may mean giving less oxygen to people who are persistent and obsessive, whose complaints are going nowhere, and giving more oxygen to perhaps the larger number of people who have genuine complaints, who you need to make sure that you're not making decisions that you'll regret. So it comes down to judgment. It comes down to just, common sense, putting in if I were the CEO of a small rural council, I would want to have one experienced member of my staff provide a triage on complaints. So you look at them and go, how much, time and effort do we really need to put into that?
Thank you. That's good advice. So I think for DAC, hang on, there's another question. Great advice. Thank you. So that's good. Thank you very much, Kirsten. I don't have any other questions at this stage. I'll just call out for any other questions. Just make sure that that's correct for DAC. There's no hands up, no other questions.
No more questions.
No? Okay.
I was expecting to be kept here all afternoon.
Me too. Anyway, look, I think we've covered most of what people are wanting from today. So with just a few minutes left, what I'll do, unless there's any burning last minute questions, if I could please just wrap up today by saying thank you to our eminent Ombudsman for joining us today, and thank you all for attending. What a interesting session. Certainly, even in my long time in local government, I learned something else today, and I know that the local government sector is always open to learning and improving the way things go. So thank you very much for that. We've recorded this session today, and that'll be placed on the Engage Vic website and shared with or in the Implementation Matters newsletter, so you'll be able to access that and also alert other people within your organisation to have a watch of today's session if they haven't been able to make it. So can I thank again the Ombudsman. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's very precious and we really appreciate you attending. Can I thank the staff at LGV for a fantastic session today, and again thank you all for your participation and your very insightful questions that have certainly brought lots more intelligence in the complaints policy space. So thank you very much, and have a great day everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.